So, good morning, all of you. Today we have with us Professor ANANTA Kumar Giri. We had a lecture by Professor Giri a few months back. It was a lecture on the topic transpositionality, and at least some of you would have listened to the lecture, I suppose. Today's lecture could be an extension of that topic, that is a transdisciplinarity. As students of literature, we all have heard of interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, and we have also heard of transdisciplinarity, but not of much, I'm sure. So, transcending disciplinary bodies. So, how literature, as students of literature, how we can connect literature with the other disciplines, transcending the boundaries of other disciplines, to create or rather construct a knowledge system. So that's a question, and that's actually the aim of transdisciplinary research. And we know that in the field of post-colonial studies, now we talk about post-colonialism and beyond, and we talk about transcultural studies. And Professor Giri knows that there are so many centers of transcultural studies in Western universities, particularly in UK. So today's topic is very interesting because we are going to listen to a new approach, a relatively new approach, by a lecture by a person from a non-literature background. That could be interesting for us. So let me introduce Professor Giri. Professor ANANTA Kumar Giri. Basically, he studied sociology. He completed sociology from the Delhi School of Economics, and after that he did another MA in anthropology, and he pursued his PhD in Johns Hopkins University, USA. And his areas of interest include development studies, social theories, very interestingly philosophy and literature. And I'm sure that we'll be getting some fresh ideas to approach when we study literature as such. So, on behalf of School of Literatures, let me wholeheartedly welcome Professor ANANTA Kumar Giri for this lecture. I also welcome my colleagues, my students, friends, and well-wishers to this lecture. So, with these words, let me invite Professor ANANTA Kumar Giri to deliver this lecture. Thank you.
Nandri. Thank you, Dr. Nair, Subhamana, and the Visesha. So thank you our respected colleagues present here, Dr. Mohit and your name, sir?
Professor Joske Manu.
Professor Jos and Nissan, our respected friend, and your name again? Hesley. We met last time. Yeah. Your name? We met last time? No. So lovely to be together this morning and trying to offer ourselves to this calling of transdisciplinarity. As Dr. Nair has already suggested, we hear a little bit about, for example, the new education policy refers to transdisciplinarity. But my paper is entitled, which I have said, it is called Transdisciplinarity and a new pragmatics and hermeneutics. As students of literature, you might have heard about these terms, pragmatics, pragmatism, how it is a very important way of thinking, pragmatics of communication. But the pragmatics of communication is very key to the literary field, isn't it? Communication is key to the literary field. But what is communication? For example, is there a relationship between communication and meditation? Where we are communicating, are we communicating reflectively or thoughtlessly? These are profound questions of life, which also affect the way we communicate. Literature is communication, but in what way we offer ourselves to the world, not only use the word, that is an instrumental use of language. And in linguistic theory as well as literary practice, suppose when a writer is writing, like we have the picture of ANANTA here, who was possibly the founder of this, one of the initiators of the school. So when you are writing, if you speak to the writers, creative writers, now they relate to words in a way, not just instrumental way. I am using this word as if word is my servant. No, letter is not my servant, isn't it? School of letters. It is the letter is the way I relate to letters. Okay? And much of the time in literature, it is an offering to the letter. I offer myself to the letter, the word in such a way that the word comes to me and the possibilities in the word get revealed in me. And that is also the originary sense of language. If you meditate with Sri Aurobindo's reflection on letters, on language, there is a very profound text called The Origins of Aryan Speech. And Sri Aurobindo is using Aryan not in a racial way, speaking about post-colonialism and everything. Sri Aurobindo is using Aryan in a sense of the nobility, the noble. And what he is saying that in the beginning, the words were in such a way that we related to words in such a way that the words themselves have energy. And that relationship with word is not just an instrumental use. We are using, of course, words to express ourselves. But while using the word to express ourselves, to develop a non-instrumental relationship with word, for example. So pragmatics has a tendency to be looked at only in an instrumental way. But pragmatics is not just limited to that. We are using something, but while using something, there is a relationship between us which goes beyond instrumentality. Like, you are using in radiology, you are using an instrument, isn't it? Now, it is an instrument, but it is not just a slave of you, isn't it? But when you grow in your consciousness, the instrument becomes a co-traveler. You respect the instrument, isn't it? It is not just, like many of us will use a pen. But you might have noticed that some people can, disrespectfully just throw a pen. But many people, they live with their pen with a wave of respectful coexistence, in which the pen is not just being used by me, the pen is a present in our mutually constituted coexistence. And here I remember a story, an experience of myself. In cultural studies and cultural sociology, a thinker his name is Pierre Bourdieu, a very influential thinker, who gave the idea of reproduction of cultural logic and all these differences. And many years ago, I was present in a seminar in Collège de France, where he was the professor of sociology. And he is a great mind, he has written so many books, And when I met him, I requested his email or number, he didn't have a pen. But the way he's such a great writer, but he does not have a pen, But he has his idea of theory of practice. It is practice which matters. But even in Pierre Bourdieu, practice is not just for instrumental use, though his theory points to that, but practice in the realm of practice, where we are doing things, that we are also expressing our deepest relationship with self, with the instrument, with the world. So that way I use pragmatics. And the meaning here is that if we are talking about transdisciplinarity, for example, philosophy and literature, or literature and history, many scholars in literature departments in English today across the country, they are doing very important work on history, isn't it? Yeah. Including your own good self, Why is that? You look at that English departments today, very interesting work is done by scholars of English, students of English literature, reflecting on the historical topics, and including very interesting kind of philosophical themes. I was visiting the university in Arunachal Pradesh, and I read a thesis by a faculty there, where he is reflecting on the philosophical writings of a few philosophers, including the poems written by a poet from India. Because earlier English studies was mainly study of what is written in the English canon. But for the last 50 years, this movement has started, where much of our interesting works on history and on the literature of the region is done by scholars of English literature. For example, Malayalam literature, Odia literature, Professor Sachidananda Mahanti, who is a thoughtful scholar of literature. He has worked on writers from Odia literature. And you will find that many professors of English today, they are engaging with the literary writings of their mother languages. And that kind of engagement is already becoming outside the canon. What constituted the discipline of English literature is being expanded. It is being deepened. So therefore, but once it is happening, in what way we can do that? What is our pragmatics of doing it? So I bring some ideas about it. And also hermeneutics. Because as a scholar of literature, so when you read a text, you are used to a particular way of reading a text. Most of the time, that the scholars of literature, they could read the text only as confined to the text itself, isn't it? And therefore, when you are analyzing, like when you are reading one work, by say O.P. Vijayan and many, or Arundhati Roy, and because this novel, let us say, the God of Small Things. Now, the novel itself is transdisciplinary in the way that it overflows. It really overflows many boundaries, isn't it? Like you remember this girl who is studying in the convent school, she is writing a letter to her family. You remember? that letter, and that letter itself is written in a code language, so that it would not be censored by the matron of the house, but it was expressing that this girl is not happy to stay there. Like Arundhati Roy's Small is beautiful, and then she has moved on to her other writings, both fiction and non-fiction, and that itself embodies a lot of border crossing of boundaries, isn't it? Similarly, another very engaged Indian writer is Amitabh Ghosh. And Amitabh Ghosh was trained as an anthropologist. And his first book, which is almost written like a literary manner, is in an antique land. Where he is also, while describing his location in this village in Egypt, and he's saying that I have come to this village to study, but many of the people in the village have gone away. So what is root? And then I myself have edited 2 volumes on roots and routes. So coming to literature then, that today the practitioners of the literary field, like novel for example, they embody varieties of border crossing. And this border crossing is also happening in a very serious way. For example, in Amitabh Ghosh, he has studied this kind of historical processes, isn't it? And it is a very deep historical studies of these processes. And then sometimes it is getting expressed in literary works. But without the detailed study of history, these literary works would not have been possible, isn't it? So there is this practice of transdisciplinarity in such a way. But this transdisciplinarity has become in such a way that it has become spontaneous. So when you read this work, you do not feel that it is 50% historical and 50% literary. You do not feel that. As each one of us, we are movements of consciousness, isn't it? We draw upon varieties of influences in life. Suppose you are a dancer. Any of you are a dancer? Or music, for example. Today, now many interesting music is fusion music. And that fusion music, when you listen to fusion music, it becomes an ensemble in itself. So that it becomes an experience of wholeness. You do not say that it is 50% Malayali or 70%, So similarly, transdisciplinarity, it becomes an experience of coming together. Coming together through processes. It is not just that I say that the scholars of literature should read history and then we become transdisciplinary. You do not become transdisciplinary by sloganeering. That scholars of literature should read more philosophy. Yes, this pious thinking, you should read more philosophy, does not make you transdisciplinary. Does it make you that? This wish that you should read more history, that does not make you transdisciplinary. For example, to understand Arundhati Roy, that's God of small things, and the caste, and what is happening with this love between this woman and the protagonist named Veluta, So that is understanding is enriched by study of sociology and anthropology, isn't it? But that sociology and anthropology of caste and humility, not that was what was done 50 years ago. Like M.N. Srinivas, one of the doyens of modern Indian sociology and anthropology, he wrote a book on religion, say 1950. Now it is almost 70 years. Not only the classical studies, but to understand the caste today, we would have to understand the contemporary sociology and anthropology of caste. So therefore, as scholars of literature, so our calling of transdisciplinarity is a calling for law of labor learning. That means we would have to learn. Okay? And learning is an effort of labor. For example, today we are living in a digital age. Okay? All of us have cell phones. But in order to learn these texts, is it enough that you sleep on the bed and look at your cell phone and you can learn? Tell me. Tell me. Is it enough? Speaking about pragmatics is that today much of our orientation of body and technology is such that our pragmatics of life is suffering from a temptation of quick fixation. For today I have to write a paper. Okay, let me just do a little web search or let me go to GChat, in this chat GPOT, what is that? Chat? Chat GPT, and I feel, okay, it helps. Why deny help from any other source? But taking help does not mean that we are absolved from the labor of learning. So I invite these three processes as very important to transdisciplinarity, is learning across boundaries. But learning across boundaries also means that we would have to learn deeply our own discipline, isn't it? So that is also vanishing today, isn't it? So we have a very quick fix approach to even learning our own discipline, isn't it? So the easier the better, we would have to, it's like, eating in the evening you go out, you have a chat, you just swallow it up in 10 minutes. So the chat GPT and the chat in the evening from the food stall, they are co-terminus. These are quick foods. They can help, but they can be dangerous also. So learning our own discipline, and once we go to our own discipline, we see that the practitioners of our own discipline, like literature, for example, like Ananta Kumi. So he has written some novels, but he has also written some non-fiction work, isn't it? He has a book called Hindutva versus Hind Swaraj. Now, many of our practitioners of literature, once we read them, we find the kind of the deep learning that they themselves have embodied. So we have a poet from Odisha. So he is greatly loved. He passed away. A very world engaging poet. His name is Jayanta Mahapatra. And the great poet from this land, K. Sachidananda, who is almost the kind of the literary voice of this place. He gives so much kind energy and leadership. And Sachidanandam was offering a tribute to his friend. Now, once we read practitioners of literature like Sachidanandam or Jayanta Mahapatra himself was trained in physics. He was a teacher of physics. And then he felt the call of the poetic. Then he started writing poems. He first started writing poems in English. And then he started writing poems in Urdu. And then he started writing poems in both in such an effortless way. So therefore, transdisciplinarity is a practice of law of labor and learning. Now, literature is writing, among other things. Literature is expression, isn't it? But this literature, is it confined only to literary works? Like when a scientist is writing a paper in science, Is it also not literature? It is also a journey with words, with experience, with knowledge, isn't it? So therefore, this letter itself is kind of the common thread which connects humanities, as for example novels, prose, poetry and essays in the departments of literature. But the same letter is also flowing in the writings of the scientists, isn't it? So therefore, the same letter becomes our mothering stream, like the water here. You have Arabic Sea. Once you go to Kolam, you are Arabic Sea. And then there is also the Bay of Bengal. Can you swim in Bay of Bengal in Kerala? No. You have to come to Kanyakumari. But once you come to Kanyakumari, on one side is the Arabic Sea, on the other side is Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean. But there you find that the same water which is there in Quilon is also linked to the water in Bay of Bengal. And it is also linked to the water in Indian Ocean. And the water in Indian Ocean then meets the Pacific at some point. The Pacific meets the Atlantic Ocean, isn't it? So like Kanyakumari is blessed by 3 oceans. Similarly, I had gone to Costa Rica last month. And Costa Rica is a beautiful country. And my friend told me that there is a lot of similarity between Costa Rica and Kerala in terms of beautiful nature and vegetation. Costa Rica is blessed by 2 oceans. So this example suggests that like the water from one ocean is not limited to that. There are meeting points. And through these meeting points, water is overflowing. Similarly, letters, as letter written by scientists and letter written by the novelists, it is the same letter which is overflowing. And if the scientist is much more literary conscious, the scientist is able to write his or her scientific treatise in a literary way. If you read scientific texts by earlier scientists, like Newton, for example, Principia Mathematica, Immanuel Kant, the great philosopher, he read science, because during our early days, that many of the philosophers, they were also scientists. Philosophy means love of knowledge, isn't it? So, love of knowledge as expressed in love for knowledge about our natural world, love of knowledge as expressed in the knowledge of our inner world, and love of knowledge as expressed in the expression of our imaginative world. So all these are connected. So therefore, in terms of literature today, in terms of transdisciplinarity, one important challenge is to, for example, literature and science. You might know that some of the challenges of our world today, like the new technology, artificial intelligence, climate change, climate collapse, all these things literature is engaging with that, isn't it? Now today there are literary expressions of the climate change, flood and extinction that is happening. Now with our much more and more opening to space, like our India, so we sent a rover to moon, isn't it? So science fiction has been there for a long time. So today, science fiction is also getting the new kind of new realizations of science fiction. And a writer who is writing science fiction without the knowledge of science, can she write science fiction? Tell me. She would have some knowledge of the contemporary advances in science and technology, isn't it? So therefore, these are the concrete ways in which we are meeting the challenge of transdisciplinarity. Along with transdisciplinarity, there is also a challenge of what I would like to call as translinguality, language. Now, many of you speak Malayalam. All of you speak Malayalam, isn't it? But some of you speak a little bit of Tamil also. Now, when you come to Chennai with your Malayalam, you can always pick up a little bit of Tamil, isn't it? Isn't it? And if you stay in Tamil Nadu for 1 month, so, it becomes a little bit part of your life. Similarly, Malayalam itself is built upon Sanskrit quite a lot. And in Malayalam there is also Arabic influence. So therefore, this language Malayalam itself is a flow of multiple languages in which we are with these languages at the same time. And that is a situation of translinguality, in the sense that at the same time I can speak a little bit of Arabic, Persian, English. I may not be a full knower of these languages. So in our linguistic relationship, and literature deals with language, in our linguistic relationship there is a dimension of translinguality. And this translinguality is different from multilinguality. Because in multilingualism, what is happening, that this is your language, my language Malayalam, your language is Odia, we will have to learn. But what I am proposing, that already our language is translingual. It has elements of many components. So we need to bring this to our understanding of discipline. As I told you, English literature itself is already transdisciplinary now. For example, it is not just limited to the canons like Shakespeare and others that we are used to, isn't it? So, but how do we understand language? In philosophy, there are two ways of looking at language. One is language is a form of life, and this is spoken by Wittgenstein, who was a great philosopher. And another philosopher, Martin Heidegger, he developed the idea that language is a movement of life, in which we are moving. Building on this, we need to look at language also as a movement of consciousness. Like, as we are in a translingual field, now if our consciousness of ourselves, of the other, becomes more and more wide, now if we live in a consciousness that language is codified by religion, that means those who speak Sanskrit, they are Hindus, or Sanskrit is limited only to Hindus. This is also a consciousness, isn't it? And today in our identity politics, you would know that there is an association of language and religion. Now Arabic means Muslim, Sanskrit means Hindu. Sanskrit means that it has nothing to do with Dalits. Now, this kind of political association of language, it limits our ability to move across language in an open way. Though historically, Sanskrit was confined to Brahmins. But even in Kerala, Sri Narayana Guru, he wrote his texts in Sanskrit, isn't it? So much important works he wrote in Sanskrit. Why did he write in Sanskrit? He was fighting against caste domination, isn't it? Why did he write in Sanskrit? So this means that Ambedkar himself, do you know that Ambedkar wanted to learn Sanskrit? Do you know it? And he had read a little bit of Sanskrit in his school days. Then after his studies at Columbia and London, he wanted to learn Sanskrit. And he was going to Bonn, a beautiful city by the Rhine River in Germany. But somehow that reality could not be fulfilled. But despite that, Ambedkar read, I think, some Sanskrit. And that means even for Dr. Ambedkar, Sanskrit was not limited to only Brahmins, because the knowledge that is there, unless we study it, then how can we offer a critique of that limited knowledge? So therefore, this whole trans language as movement, it also related to movement of consciousness, especially today. Because today in a politically charged climate, it is very easy to find a political marker for everything. But language and nature, they are our mothering foundations. Like in this space, Malayalam. Malayalam is a mother for all people who live in Kerala and beyond, isn't it? Is it limited only to Hindus, to Christians, to Muslims, and only to people who live in Kerala? Because there are many people who live outside Kerala today who speak Malayalam. So, two aspects of human life. One is nature, like a river. A river is flowing. Is it limited to one religion? Language is flowing. Is it limited to one political marker of that language? No. So therefore, language also needs to be understood in terms of the reality of our life. That language is not limited to any particular political group. And to understand this, we need a movement of consciousness. Because today, there is a pressure on imprisoning our consciousness along limited categories. So with this, let me offer some further elaborations. I hope, is it okay so far? Mansa, no problem? So I thought I would create a background for understanding transdisciplinarity as it is related to literature and the wider concerns. Then I will give a few more elaboration on the issues involved here. Maybe at this juncture, let us have a discussion for 10 minutes, please. So I invite questions, comments and reflections on the issues I have presented so far. But let me not forget to just bring one issue about language and communication. That just think about this, that I am proposing love, labor and learning as important paths in which we become ourselves and we become transdisciplinary. I am coming from Mata Amritanandamai Ashram early this morning. And Amma in one of her, you know Amma? Amma in one of her writings is saying, Amma is born here and the language in which she expresses herself is Malayalam, isn't it? And though, she can understand a bit of Spanish and things, but the only language that she expresses her is Malayalam. But people from all over the world, she talks to people from all over the world. She listens to them in Spanish, in Italian, and how it is possible. And Amma has this sentence that I read yesterday, which I thought is very deeply inviting for all of us to meditate and live with. He's saying that when it comes to communication, the only language of communication is love. Isn't it? That means that love is such a language which is with and beyond all our known and unknown languages, that it flows, even if I do not know a language. But with the language of love, my kind of phenomenal languages, I have a way to be with phenomenal languages, with my limitations and possibilities and transcendence. So similarly, if we bring that to transdisciplinarity, which means that I am a student of literature, I do not know science, I am not a geneticist, but if I have the love for knowledge, then it is not impossible for me to learn a little bit of it, isn't it? So again, the kind of love as the language of communication is also a very important way of learning in the field of transdisciplinarity in terms of learning across disciplines. So some thoughts from you, please.
As you are already taken us through what transdisciplinarity is, from my perspective, I might be wrong and you can correct me, definitely, but yeah, when we speak about transdisciplinarity, you took us through taking two different sides to it, like bringing together two different distinguishable markers, like taking literature with probably psychology, human psychology, or probably politics with literature, or history with literature, and bringing them together with a blend that's only possible with what literature students, as literature students. So that was something that was interesting for me. Also, one point that stood out for me was in this political environment, you spoke about how everything could be politicized. And that was one question I had in my mind. Like, as literature students, as we have research papers and journals, I've heard a lot of times where these things get politicized, not necessarily meant in a political way, but everything gets politicized. And how, as you or as a person who does research and as people, and not just as a researcher, but probably as a person who's opinionated, go through it as a way forward, because our political scenario is such that anything and everything could be a point of contention. So that was one thing that was like something that came into my mind. So that was one thing which stood out for me, and also the fact that today, as a global citizen, when we have technology at our fingertips, it's possible, as you said, about the labor and how we not necessarily take the harder way to get through the facts, and we use ChatGPT or possibly any other technological innovation, which is possibly a part of human progress. But definitely, as you spoke about, it just kind of was a fresh perspective for me, how human labor will and always will stand superior regardless of the technological enhancements. So yeah, that's been all I could take it because I just took a break because of the claustrophobia. So yeah.
Where are you from?
I'm from Mumbai. Yeah.
So you speak Marathi?
Yeah.
कशी आहात?
छान. मला कळतं मराठी, पण ग्रामरमध्ये थोडे काय इतके छान नसतात, पण मला बोलायला देतात.
What inspired you to come to MG University from Mumbai?
For me, I am born and brought up in Mumbai, but my parents are from Kerala. So definitely Malayalam has been my native language, mother tongue. So it's always been a sense of familiarity. And when I speak about school of letters, it's definitely a place where I can grow as a person. And that's been consistent through these few months. Maybe in my creative aspects and as a human being also. So that's been there.
I'm just having a doubt here. When you were talking about these advantages of transdisciplinarity, my doubt is this idea of transdisciplinarity when we take this case of Yuval Noah Harari's Homo sapiens. While reading that book, I found that book not properly documented, not properly research kind of a text when it's coming from the point of view of a researcher. So when we, and I don't remember the name of the person, he's an Indian author who's Mahabharata, Jaya, there are texts like a very recent author. I don't remember this. Yeah. Devdutt Patnaik. Yeah, and I have a kind of fear there. Like when you write fiction, when you make science or something fiction, like in fiction, are we losing some kind of the scientific temper there, like to see things through? When you are writing about, you are again mythologizing certain myths, certain epics. Are we trying to use this sense of looking through these things when demythologization and geographical, mythological points are being cited by Cambridge scholars and all? Like at that point, we are again going back to mythologizing certain spaces. I have a fear there. So when we talk about transdisciplinarity, aren't these two the disadvantages where we erase these thin lines of demarcations? Though in other sense, when this digital humanities and this health graphic novels and health humanities, these trends are there. Like, these are recent trends, but when we come to these myths and religion and politics being fictionalized, I don't know where this is leading us to as a nation, as a group of students or literary people who should be like educated or taught to have this scientific technique. So I have that. Yeah, I am a guest lecturer. I'm into philosophy, like phenomenology, a bit. I'm into gender and sexuality. I did a PhD research. It's performative of gender, agency, and broadcast rereading of community functions. English and foreign languages. Like, Ramadevi.
Where are you from? So how?
Hi everyone, I am Nisha. Literature is not my subject. My subject is radiology. But sir said it's all literature. So we all are going through some literatures. Otherwise, our studies are not completed, right? So my concern is what to say. We are dealing with so many literatures, publications, and what is the relevance of the public relation between the nation or in between the states? What is the relevance of the languages? What we are talking, sir? I think as sir already explained about this topic. So thank you so much for hearing. So you are very blessed today with Dr. ANANTA Kumar Giri. So he is our family friend, our professor. So in many things we are very close with each other. So thank you so much. Thank you.
So just was that is this spirituality a part of transdisciplinarity or some correlation between these two things? Just the question when you mentioned about Amma.
Yes.
I was coming from there. Not from the ashram.
Where Where is your home?
Near Kottayam.
Yes. I'm coming from here, your village this morning. And what is your study here, please?
MA.
What is your area of interest?
I'm alright. I know it's more specific area. History. It's not part of literature.
Okay, now still some more thoughts.
Actually, I have a doubt. I was listening to Deepa's question. My doubt is something similar to what she asked. When you speak about, when we discuss transdisciplinarity, will this idea of, the idea of transdisciplinarity is all about fluid boundaries between different disciplines. But does this actually affect the authenticity of this discipline?
Your good name?
I'm Dilna. Dilna, D-I-L-N.
Dil. And you are teaching here?
No, I'm doing my research
Which topic?
on memory studies.
Which Dr. Rajesh?
No, Dr. Mohan.
Where are you from? Yourself. No question. And yourself. So then, any other person who would volunteer to speak? Now, thank you, friends. And like Donna, thank you for bringing these very important questions. One is that there is a dominant primacy of the political and which is related to the condition of our living. The same thing 50 years ago was not done. And what it means then that the contemporary primacy of the political also has to be understood temporarily through the flow of time, where things were not so politicized. And as things were not so politicized at another time, means that even now things would be different in terms of politicizing everything. And this is an implication for transdisciplinarity. But the moment we are talking about transdisciplinarity, maybe we have an image of speciality. Like one discipline is here, especially for example, literature department is here and the department of chemistry is not here, is it? So these two different departments are located in two different special locations of the university. So therefore, when we are talking about transdisciplinarity, we have an image of speciality. But transdisciplinarity also involves time. Because in another time, disciplines were related in a different way. For example, there are many great philosophers who are also great scientists, including, now Rabindranath Tagore himself, if you read his biography. So he wrote a book about science and biology. And he was working on science and he met Einstein. And the dialogue between Einstein and Tagore was a very important dialogue. So, if we bring time here, so what I am proposing in my related parts of the paper is that we move not only across space as discipline, but across time. And today we are living in the present. And because we are living in the present, that does not mean that time is limited to present. Does it mean that? Tell me. It is going to mean that. But because of the dominant logic of the time, what we are suffering from what one literature scholar has called temporal narcissism. We have narcissism, that means, but we are suffering from temporal narcissism. For transdisciplinarity, one thing transdisciplinarity means, with the challenges that we must accept the challenges and embody love, labor and learning far more seriously, so that the accounts, the details of history and everything, that in the name of border crossing, that we cannot just evade the responsibility of putting exact dates and things like this. All these are part of labor and there is no shortcut to it. So therefore, it requires a kind of egolessness, speaking about spirituality. Because what has happened is that all of us, we are our own disciplinary ego. So if you go to the sociology department, so you talk to the sociologists, they would tell that sociology is the most important discipline in the universe, isn't it? Okay. As for example, you go to a person, he or she, you meet a woman, she would try to present herself as the most beautiful woman in the world, isn't it? And especially in a relationship, boy and girl, the boy would say that I am the most beautiful, handsome person in the world. But coming to discipline, that each discipline wants to has a sense of disciplinary superiority or kind of egocentricity. With that disciplinary egocentricity, if I come to another discipline with my entrenched disciplinary egocentricity, then I cannot learn much from another discipline, can I? So only when I realize the significance of my own discipline, the significance of my own identity, like I have a body, and the uniqueness of my body is deeply significant, isn't it? And that significant uniqueness is related to universality. But in the name of universality, I cannot ignore the uniqueness of my body, can I? Only by developing the uniqueness of my body, I can become the part of the communicative body of the universe. Similarly, by developing the uniqueness of my discipline, which also requires what is my discipline, as I told you, English literature. The way English literature was constructed 50 years ago, today it is not the same. So therefore, in terms of authenticity also, that authenticity is not a static marker. Authenticity, one thing about authenticity is that we must not evade the responsibility to express ourselves with as much sincerity, truthfulness as possible. But authenticity is not a simple thing to do. In what authentic way I become a practitioner of literature today. That authenticity is also a sadhana, isn't it? It is the way I put into practice my own journey with literature brings my own authenticity. So therefore, coming to this temporality is that once we open ourselves through flow of time, we realize that disciplines were related to each other before modernity in a particular way. The pre-modern disciplines didn't have strict boundaries, did they? In the modern period, disciplines became strict. But in the postmodern moment, all these have been challenged. But in my paper, I also write about the transmodern, a moment called the transmodern, where the transmodern moment is such that earlier we thought about tradition and modernity. And it has affected our understanding of literature. Then the postmodern challenge came. But along with the postmodern challenge, speaking about science, and here while replying to your question, I am also bringing certain elements of my paper which I didn't present, but I am trying to link these thoughts together. Like the postmodern challenge to reality, for example. The postmodern challenge to truth. The postmodern challenge to truth is a challenge to one hegemony construction of truth. That does not mean that postmodernity does not give us the responsibility to search truth. Does it mean? Does it mean that any lie becomes truthful? Does it mean that? Does it mean that murder becomes giving birth to life? Does it mean that today, in the newly changed context, people are saying by killing I am giving new life? Isn't it? But does it mean that? So, in my paper, I talk about a few transformative thoughts that have happened. Postmodernism is one. Post-colonialism is other. You know, the post-colonial challenge that many scholars of literature and philosophy from India have taken part in. That this post-colonial challenge is challenging us to understand the entrenched colonialism in many of our architecture of thinking and practice. Along with this, there are a few other terms. One is post-positivism in science. Because our notion of science also, there is a positivist approach to science, like Newtonian mechanics. But in science also there has been development of quantum physics. Today in physics, Newtonian mechanics explains only part of the reality. The quantum reality cannot be. Newtonian mechanics is the life sciences, physics. The turning point that is happening, it is expressed by a writer like this. Earlier we thought that everything is matter. Today science is challenging us to realize that matter is spirit. Now this profound turning has implications for literature, isn't it? Look at magical realism. When Tommy Morrison is writing, or many of the writers in so in terms of timing, it is okay to, what is your break? 1 o'clock is the break. So we have another 10-15 minutes is okay. You are comfortable. So for example, in Odisha, we have a great writer and who is deeply engaged all over India and globally. His name is Manoj Das. Have you heard about this writer, Manoj Das? Now, if you read Manoj Das, so you'll find that how that in one, the reality, how there is a, speaking about spirituality, that how reality, trees, rivers, sky, human beings, they are already part of many interconnected waves of reality. Therefore, this thought that matter is spirit, and in a work like Manoj Das, it is getting expressed in such a beautiful literary way. And if you read Sri Aurobindo, for example, his son, and his meditations on literature, language, and so there is a kind of a coming together of practitioners of literature and philosophers of literature, as well as the development in science. So, along with that, along with post-positivism, there is also the linguistic term, as I mentioned, now language, and language is a movement of consciousness. Then there is the feminist term. The feminist challenge everything, everything, including literature, and then there is the ecological term. So a great philosopher from India, his name is R. Sundar Raj. Since you work on phenomenology, so he wrote a book many years ago called Beyond the Crisis of European Sciences, Towards New Beginnings. So in this, Sundararajan is talking about these three terms: linguistic term, feminist term, and the ecological, to which I am adding two more terms. One is the onto-decolonial. It is related to the colonial critique. The idea of the onto-decolonial critique means, and it is given by a very important thinker of our time, Sabelo. He is from South Africa. He has written a book called Epistemic Freedom in Africa. And we say that the colonial critique, it cannot be just the critique of the other. It has to be the critique of self. And the onto-decolonial meaning that the reconstitution is ontological. My own self-reconstruction as well as structural. And then I am bringing the spiritual. So to understand our contemporary moment, so transdisciplinarity as part of this five turns turning around that is happening. And then here, this whole notion of science, science, literature, and so these five terms we will bring together. The transmodern that is coming is that this idea is given by a philosopher from South America. His name is Enrique Dussel. Since you talked about perspectives, perspectives today are not just east and west, but they are also north and south. And these four directions are there everywhere, isn't it? Like Indian studies, not only east and west, north and south. But these four directions are only the beginning of an infinite directionality that we are challenging. So what Dussel is saying, that our contemporary moment is a transmodern moment, meaning that everywhere in the world today, whether in China, India, Argentina, America, what is happening in America, everywhere is that we are at present, but being at present against the backdrop of modernity and limitations of modernity as spoken by postmodernism. But still we are trying to find solutions to the problems, not just in the given modernistic way, not just in the given traditional way, not only through the European family current called postmodernism, but by discovering the solutions from our own reality, the contemporary as well as history. It is 2023 that we are doing, but our responses are not according to modernistic space. So this is the idea of the transfer. Then Deepa, your questions, as I have briefly reflected upon, yes, so we need to be more rigorous. At the same time, the whole question of mythology, for example. Of course, there is the, when you create new mythologies, new stories, to what extent it relates to the story that is written in Madras. We must ask this kind of questions. But the wider question of mythology and science also needs revisiting, in the sense that that how that there is a mythic dimension. That mythic dimension you have to understand in an open way. Then thank you Nisa for joining, and Dilna, your question about authenticity. So then moving on, let me bring one or two things very quickly, please. That in this paper, I am also developing an idea of transdisciplinary commons. You know, commons, like you have a garden, you have a river. The commons are what is for all of us, isn't it? Similarly, today, in our knowledge space, we need to realize that we are part of a garden of knowledge. And therefore, this transdisciplinary commons. And that transdisciplinary commons can be realized through language like Loka Sangraha. In Srimad Bhagavad Gita, there is talk about Loka Sangraha. Loka Sangraha means gathering of people. Similarly, in transdisciplinarity, there is gathering of disciplines. Think of a festival you are having, isn't it? So when you are having a festival, a music festival, you are bringing all kinds of music, isn't it? So similarly, we would have to cultivate transdisciplinarity as a transdisciplinary festival. And what role universities can play, what role departments can play. For example, the School of Letters, think of holding a transdisciplinary festival. Where science writers and and poets and all of these people, they come together. So in terms of pragmatics today, we need to create this kind of transdisciplinary festivals so that we go beyond the rigidity of the modern knowledge system. Then I talked about a new epistemology, new ontology, and then ontological epistemology of participatory and planetary epistemology, which means that transdisciplinarity is not just an epistemic process, or we have this method and then we become transdisciplinary. It is ontological. That means in our own self-practice, we will have to practice transdisciplinarity, like you practice music. And then it is an ontological epistemology of participation, in which the ontological and the epistemic come together. Then another quick thought here is that transdisciplinarity also involves dialogues. Dialogues not only among disciplines, but among civilizations. And that is related to your question. For example, what is literature? Now, what is literature, like what is philosophy? These are foundational questions. What is world literature? After the great poet, the great poet Goethe, who talked about world literature, then Rabindranath Tagore also wrote about world literature. But in order to understand both literature and world literature, we would have to understand Goethe's perspective on world literature, which is maybe a little bit of limited to the West, maybe. Though Goethe himself translated Persian poet, and he wrote a book called East-West Vivar. Tagore himself, he traveled all across the world, including Argentina, where he developed a relationship with a great Argentine writer, Victoria Ocampo. And if you read the friendship between Victoria Ocampo and Tagore, and in the centenary volume of Tagore in 1961, there is a moving narration by Victoria, and it will bring tears to one's eyes. two souls are met, there is a relationship of affection. And Tagore is coming back, he's not going to see Victoria physically in his own life. So therefore, what I am suggesting is that any theme that we are working with, like power, for example, power is a very important concern in literature. But what is our idea of power? It is mainly an idea, a theory of power. Power means to dominate others. But power also means in the traditions like Tantra and spiritual traditions, power means to conquer yourself, isn't it? Both Atma Jaya and Atma Sakti. That means there are many downward pulling forces in our own life which we would have to have the ability to kind of come to terms with. And it requires power. And that Atma Sakti also becomes Sahasakti, means it is a power together. For example, in reality today, there is in Kerala, Kutumbasri. It's an interesting social belief. In Kutumbasri, women are community. But the language for Kutumbasri is a very beautiful word. Kutumba means family. But in English language, what is the word? Self-help. You see the distinction between language of Kutumbasri and self-help. Now, if you, as students of literature, just give yourself to the invitation without being judgmental about it, but it is still possible to realize the Kutumbasri is a more expansive term than self-help. Because Kutumbasri is also connoting solidarity, mutual help, and the language of self-help group is limited. So from this, we can invite ourselves to the important challenge is that transdisciplinarity is not just interaction among disciplines in the current university paradigm. Because the present university knowledge system looks at everything mainly from a Eurocentric perspective. There is not foundational transformation of that. In order that we can really move ahead with transdisciplinarity, we would have to interrogate the mono-civilizational construction of many of our disciplinary themes like power or knowledge. Knowledge in Indic tradition requires both knowledge of the external world and knowledge of the inner world, isn't it? And in Advaita, it is going beyond the dualism between the inner and the outer, between the self and the other. So we need to bring trans-civilizational dialogue and transdisciplinarity together as part of what can be called as planetary conversations. Because today all of us, whether we are in Kottayam or Mumbai, or Itmanur, or in Costa Rica, all of us, we are belonging to our planet. Can you disagree on that? But as we are belonging to this planet, the trees, I was in California just 10 days ago, and I was visiting the very ancient trees, whose lives may be 5,000 years. Now these trees, they are also belonging to our planet, isn't it? So therefore, all of us, in the sense that in terms of conversation, transdisciplinarity, that how do we learn with our trees? How do we learn with our animals, for example? The literature here can help us. Because slowly and slowly, the writing about animals that is developing. But that also can be related to a very ancient genus, which is one of the earliest traditions of literature. It is the Jataka Katha, isn't it? The Jataka tales. And what are the Jataka tales about? The stories about animals and man-human relationship. And animals are not just slaves there, isn't it? So therefore, in the way we come to the beginning, because the beginning is ever present. So I was part of two very interesting conversations in California. And the second conference was a conference on the one of the thinker is Jen Gebser, and he has a book called the Ever-Present Origin. The Ever-Present Origin, an origin in that sense that the origin of life that is there. That origin of life beginning through different complexification. But that ever-present origin is co-present at this moment, isn't it? Because the world is created, that does not mean that the creation moment has stopped in the development of the world. So it is that kind of consciousness that we will have to develop in transdisciplinarity. And finally, I want to bring this issue that power and suffering, in the sense that disciplinary ego and disciplinary egocentricity is leading to disciplinary patterns. Of course, it has this socio-political reality, like in a university, how much money has to go to science department, and if you do a study, that most of the money is going to science department. Why? Now, just I give just one thought that if you look at the allocation of resources in the last 10 years, the present union government, it is speaking for Indian country. Very important. But how much money has been spent given to, for example, literature department, and how much money has been sent to science departments? There is a Prime Minister's scholarship, and if you are a student of science, you get 80,000. There is no Prime Minister's scholarship for students of literature. Why? So therefore, this kind of disciplinary, step-motherly, structure is creating pain and suffering. Now then all of us, I might study literature, but when I would like to have my children, so I would not like to send my children to study literature. Why? Because I am worried. Though I myself, out of love, like yourself, Dana, you have the love for literature, you can. And maybe after 20 years, what would happen? Whether you can sustain the same love for literature through your children. If the structural reality becomes so anxiety producing, then all of us would like to just study engineering and science, and there would be nobody left to write a poem. And this suffering that is created, the unnecessarily structural resource allocation for science and technology, and the neglect of humanities, it is a question of profound human suffering. And its implication for our society is terrible, because our society is nurtured not at the university level but in our kindergarten. If we do not have teachers at the kindergarten, who is going to raise us in the university? And I would conclude with this thought from Arnold Toynbee about power and suffering. He is writing, in human life, suffering is the antithesis of power. And it is also more characteristic and more fundamental element in life than power is. Suffering is the essence of life, because it is the inevitable product of an unresolvable tension between a living creature's essential impulse to try to make itself into the center of the universe and its essential dependence on the rest of creation and on absolute reality on which all creatures live and move and have their being. On the other hand, human power in all its form is limited, and in the last is an illusion. So therefore, today, for transdisciplinarity, we need to understand the illusory nature of human power. And spirituality comes here. Like when Amma is saying that it is love which is a language which can really flow across water. That language is challenge to us to understand the illusion of our power. Therefore, any attitude towards life that idolizes human power is bound to be a wrong attitude towards suffering, and in consequence, wrong attitude towards suffering. So please meditate on these lines as we continue to reproduce the ideas of Foucault, knowledge. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of School of Letters, the faculty, and my friends here, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Sir, Professor ANANTA Kumar Anil Sir. It's been a pleasure to have you amongst us and to hear you share your thoughts about transdisciplinarity and how it transcends the boundaries of what literature could be. And it's been great, and it's been an interesting take of how you spoke about Kudumbashri, literary limitations, or maybe the power, the dualism of how there is an external side of it, an internal side, and how you bring together all those things. It's been interesting and it's been very enlightening for us. Thank you for that. And also, we thank the whole faculty, starting from Rajesh sir, Vijay sir, then we have Deepa ma'am, then Lindsay ma'am, and also ma'am, Lisa ma'am. Thank you for being a part of us, part of this gathering, and being a gracious presence with us. And also, I thank all of my friends here who was a part of this gathering, who interacted with us together, who shared your thoughts, and every one of you. Thank you. On this note, once again, sir, thank you for being a part of us. Thank you everyone.